the floor is yours about automatic consolidation of French law.
Okay, so thank you and good afternoon. So today we'll talk about automatic consolidation of the French law and some automatic system to do that on the fly every day. And I'm very happy to have a dynamic community of people interested in computer science and law, because it's a subject that I work on for almost 20 years now. And in fact, I'm very happy to see a lot of people interested in that. So the main research question I tried to answer is it possible to build an automatic consolidation system of the French and the European law with 100% reliability and to maintain this reliability over time? And in fact, this is a question that has been asked by the French official journal producer, and because right now they have some manual system. But let's first try to understand what exactly is consolidation, because all legal systems don't use consolidation as the main way of publishing the law. But let's have some time to discuss about that. So in France, the law enters in force only if it has been published in the official journal. So anything that hasn't been published in the official journal doesn't come into force. And in fact, a published law enters in force the day after its publication, or maybe later, because it can be delayed in terms of entering in force. And the successive modification of the law are also published in the official journal, but under the form of patches. And it resembles something like code patches, but it's patches of the law. And in fact, the consolidation process applies those patches and creates some, for a specific version of the law, at a specific date, it creates some version of the law. And those versions of the law are not published in a complete form in the official journal. So it implies that they have no legal values. And in fact, this process is currently essentially manual. So every day there are people working, taking official journal and trying to understand what has changed and applying that manually to some version of the law that is published online, for instance. The problem is that lawyers and lawmakers, they only use those consolidated versions to work. For instance, in fact, the new laws are created from consolidated versions, even if, in fact, this version doesn't have any real legal value. So this process must be as reliable as possible. Let's see an example. Here is an article of some French law published in an official journal. You can see that, in fact, it looks like a patch. So it means we have sentences like at the beginning of the first paragraph of the law, blah, blah, blah. We add some one, and then in the two here, you can see that we, in fact, replace some words, etc., etc. So really, it's like a patch. So this is what is published in the official journal, and this is, in fact, the target of the modification. This is the article being modified by the law I displayed just before. So this is one article of the Commerce Code, and in fact, the translation is made by me, so it's not completely, it's not an official translation, but I think the French is difficult to understand for everybody. So, so let's see now the process. How is it working? In fact, the law here is published in the official journal at a given day, and some people start to consolidate this law and creates, in fact, if you look at the text here, in fact, it creates two new versions. The first version is a version that is created from this text when this text enters in force. It means that a new version will be created October 26th. And you can see here that the second version is created on January 1st. So it means that if you look at the process here, someone just has to take the text published in the official journal has to apply the changes on the article 7234 of the commercial code, then creates two new versions. So this is the ideal scenario. So someone takes the text and, in fact, creates two new versions. And this is done by some specific software where you can replace text. But this is very basic operations. So this is a result of the changes. You can see in blue everything that has changed in the first version induced by the modifying text. Sorry. And this is a second version that will be enforced, that has entered in force in January 1st, 2023. So, why do we try to automatically consolidate? The problem is that the constraint time to manually consolidate the text, they cannot always be respected. For instance, there is no one working on Saturday and Sundays, even if the official journal is published on Saturday and Sundays. You also have huge texts implying that there are a lot of changes to apply, and sometimes you don't have time to do that in one day. So there are some misleading, even wrong information published on Legistix, meaning that if you look at the law of Legistix, maybe you are looking at a bad version of the law, and even if you think that this version is enforced, it is not. Also, the manual consolidation is only a syntactic process. You cannot trace back, in fact, the exact actions that generate, in fact, some version of the law. And also, there can be consolidation errors. And the reduction of the new text, there are also manual. So there are also errors in the reduction of the law. In fact, we should have some way of encoding, in fact, the change under the form of a program, for instance, to automatically apply that. This is the goal, in fact, of automatic consolidation. So what we try to achieve here is, so first let's see of an example. Here is an example of an arrêté. This is some kind of law in France that has been published in the yesterday's official journal. In fact, if you look at the Legistix website today, in fact, this arrêté changed an arrêté of January 9. If you look at that online, the law that is published on Legistix is false, because it hasn't been changed by anyone, because no one is working on Saturday and Sunday. So, some figures about how many, the number of texts that are changed by year, for instance. This is a mean of the number of texts published in official journal, and so 3,000 of those texts change another text, resulting in 38,000 articles change per year, and in fact it's 127 articles change per day, per official journal published. And this is definitely a huge work to do manually. So what we try to achieve is to do that automatically with a system called Legistix. This is a research project started 2 years ago at Paris. And the question is to build, in fact, and maintain automatically a graph representing the full structure of the French and the European law. And in fact, the idea is not to understand the law, but it's only to understand the legistic structure of the law. It means that how the law is organized and how the law changed, by which text each article is changed, and so on. So the idea is really to capture the evolution of the relation between documents and set over time. And automatic consolidation is one of the sub-programs of the graph constructions we try to achieve with the Legistix project. So here is a very partial example of a graph. So this is some very simple example. For instance, the example I showed before, it's this law 2022-1348 is in fact changing some version of the article of the Commerce Code with some relations like creation, prepending, replacing, and so on. This is exactly what we want to capture in this graph. In fact, we don't want only to capture, in fact, that in the graph, but we want to generate automatically the code that creates this graph. The data we are working on is, in fact, the open data provided by Legistix. It's approximately 1 million texts with 2.3 million articles. And in fact, there are, in the manually consolidated database that we also use, something like 1.6 million article versions. And the data are imported daily and analyzed in a huge version database in the Legistix systems. So, the different phases of the system are the following. First, we need to recognize the reference of the modified text. So, for instance, in the example before, we need to recognize what is in blue, the article let 7234 of the commercial code, and we need to retrieve that in the system, the Legistix system, meaning that we need to transform, in fact, the text, the natural text, into some ID to have, in fact, the target of the modification. And then, more tricky, we need to determine the version of the reference text, meaning that we need to know exactly what is or what are the different versions of the text that are changed. In the example before, we need to recognize two versions. So, in fact, after this step, the creation of the modification program can change. So, we start, in fact, from what I showed here. We start from this, so this article, and we try to transform that into a program. So we can start here building the program, and the program will be, in fact, we will start first by getting the two versions of the source and the target of the modification, with some specific dates, and those dates are inferred by analyzing, in fact, the source text. And then we can create two new versions of the text, a version v1 and v2. Both are versions of the t, which is the target. But you can notice that the version 2 is created after the version 1, because we need first to have the version 2, and then we can transform, in fact, the version 1 into the version 2. Everything we do here, in fact, is done in the lazy mode, meaning that we don't actually change when we do new version, we don't actually change nothing. We just, in fact, try to schedule the change with lazy functions. Almost all the methods I show here are, in fact, returning a function, which is, in fact, a closure that we can apply next to the text. So, here is a full program that is generated, for instance. So after generating the version v1, we can, in fact, schedule the change, and all the changes that are described here, in fact, they just capture what is written, in fact, in the French language. And transforming, in fact, you can notice the par methods, for instance, are lazy methods, because they are not applied here. It just means get, in fact, the paragraph that starts with a 1, here gets a paragraph that starts with a 3, and so on. And then, in fact, once we schedule the change for the v1, we can schedule the change for the v2, and you can notice that the v2 is obtained after the v1, and so on. Then, when we have that, we can, in fact, we have a program that, when run, can modify the text from a specific version by creating two new versions automatically. And this is completely generated, it is generated completely automatically by the Legistix system. So the full system, in fact, so for each published official journal, generate all the programs induced by the modifying text, and then apply the change after all the programs have been generated. For each, apply the change to generate all the new versions of the articles we want to obtain. In fact, the consolidation system has been built completely gradually, because in fact we have the manual consolidation, the past manually obtained consolidated versions, so we can compare, starting from the first version of each text, what our system returns compared to the manual operations. And if they differ, you can say that either the manual consolidation is wrong or the automatic rules are false. In fact, the full process can be restarted at any time to check for regression issues when we change the rule. And we did that for all texts in the Legi database that I presented before. So, the current status of the system is that we have now a fully automatic creation of programs that modify text and create versions using the method I just showed. And in fact, we introduced a new functional API to express lazy modification programs. This is the example I just presented. Because the example I presented is a real code that can be executed. We also have an engine to apply those transformation programs with the validation methods I just presented. Right now it's implemented in Python with some C code for speed to speed up, in fact, the parsing of all the huge XML text of Legifrance. And we also have a framework to compare manually and automatically the consolidated text to have something that is robust. The next step of that is to continue to refine rules, because right now we are now at 100% reliability. We are at 93%, which is already a good, very good score. And we want to introduce some hybrid system where we use rules and machine learning, in fact, with already consolidated data as a training set, so that we can, in fact, detect future forms of changes, detect errors that occur at the same time in manual and automatic consolidation. That is a possibility. And we also need to reinforce the formal system of rules. And then the next step will be to apply those techniques to European data. And in fact, we need only to adapt the identifier and the change detection, because the API will stay the same. So thank you for your attention, and I'm waiting for your questions.
Thank you very much for this presentation of this very impressive work. We'll take questions from the audience. I'm sure the members of the audience wants to know more about the technical details or other aspects of the project. Yes, Lawrence? Yeah, I'll give you the mic. Thank you for reminding me of my duties.
Is it working?
I think so. No. Yeah.
Hello?
Tap with your fingers. Tap it.
Hello. Thank you for a really interesting talk. This looks like a great system. I'm sure you're aware of Commons also, and I wondered if you...
Sorry, I don't hear nothing.
Hello?
No, I don't hear. I don't hear well.
Ask your questions and I'll repeat it, because I have had the impression that the mic for the the remote speaker is about here.
Do you mind?
No.
Yeah, so you're probably aware, first of all, thank you for the paper, really interesting system. You're probably aware that in the EU at least, and I don't know about France, but probably, new legislation has been produced and drafted using a Toso, the XML format. And I just wondered what impact that would have, or what positive impact that might have on the system because of its structured nature. Particularly, you made reference to using regex, for example, to identify elements of the document, and of course, a structured format like AKN would provide that, a Toso would provide that. So I just wondered if that would play any role in the future development of Legistix. Thank you.
Yes, indeed, because in fact, something I did not mention is that the text we can produce with the program, in fact, captures more information, meaning that for almost for every word or group of words, you know exactly where those words come. For instance, you know that some group of words comes from the change from another text. And that you can capture that with XML because it's hierarchical nature. And formats like Toso can be very, very useful to do that, to express very rich contents with links inside the text. So definitely this is something I'm looking at.
Thank you very much. Do we have other questions in the room? I think there are no questions on air needs. I have a question for that. I think I have a question for you. When you speak of the rules that you have to refine to basically get the changes right, are these all regexp, regular expressions, or do you have something more fancy for text transformation and manipulation?
This is definitely more fancy because, in fact, the regular expressions are there to. In fact, at the end, I need a regular expression because I need to have the parts of the transformation. Because if you want to transform that into code, you need to have a very precise way of producing lexems to have the different parts you can transform into code. But to achieve that, there are in fact some string grammars with some very simple backtracking to be able to try something, and if it's not that. In fact, there are some refinements, and in fact, we have grammars that are composed to, in fact, detect things and then go back and it's not the right one. And it's definitely more fancy than regular expressions by themselves. It's regular expressions plus other grammars.
Okay, is the code open source? Can we go somewhere and have a look at these grammars? Because
very soon.
Okay.
very soon. Right now, it's not production ready, so I think I will do more cleanup.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, but it will be definitely open source, and in fact, the results also will be available on the web. I mean, the transform text with the enrichments I just mentioned.
Okay.
Okay.
If we don't have any more questions, we can thank the speaker again.